Imagine standing in your own living room holding your own house keys while a screaming Karen tells the police that you are the intruder. Absurd, right? Well, that's exactly how my day went. My wife and I had just moved into our new home, the one we spent years saving for the one we planned to raise our first child in. It was supposed to be our safe, quiet sanctuary. And yet somehow, within 48 hours, a complete stranger demanded that we hand over the entire house to her son. A kid I had never seen before. A kid who walked up to my door and claimed he wanted to live here like it was an Airbnb he forgot to book. I thought it was all a misunderstanding until the situation twisted so fast, so wildly out of control, that I found myself moments away from being evicted from my own property. Before we jump in, drop your location and local time in the comments, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next insane HOA story. The day before everything spiraled into chaos had actually been one of the calmest we'd had in months. My wife and I were finally settling into a routine, unpacking the last few boxes, hanging the final picture frames, arguing playfully about where the crib should go in the baby's room. She was glowing in that way, expecting mothers do, and for once I felt like life was aligning the way it was supposed to. Then came the knock. It wasn't aggressive or frantic. It was a timid, almost polite tapping, like someone who wasn't sure they should even be there. I opened the door and found myself staring at a kid, well, a young man, I guess, who looked like he had stepped right off a freshman orientation poster. He couldn't have been more than 18. Slim frame, oversized backpack, messy brown hair, a nervous expression that didn't match what he said next. I want to live here. I actually looked past him at first, expecting to find a camera crew hiding behind my bushes. Nothing. No friends, no phone recording me, no signs of a prank. Just this kid peering up at me through thick glasses that kept sliding down his nose. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, "you must have the wrong place. This house isn't for rent." He blinked, confused, as if I were the one misunderstanding something obvious. "But it's small," he replied. "So it's probably cheap. I want to live here." I let out a short laugh, thinking he was trying to be funny, but his face didn't budge. He was dead serious. "No, really," I said, shaking my head. "We're not renting out any rooms. We're expecting a baby soon, and we need the entire house." He frowned deeply, as though my explanation was the unreasonable one, and shrugged. "Okay, but think about it. I need a place to stay. And this one looks affordable. If there were an award for misplaced confidence, this kid deserved it." I politely told him again that the house wasn't on the market, wasn't listed, wasn't available, and definitely wasn't his. Then I closed the door, certain I'd just experienced one of those bizarre misunderstandings that you tell your friends about and laugh over later. My wife asked what happened, and when I told her, she nearly doubled over from laughing. "Maybe he's pledging a fraternity and lost a bet," she joked. "Or maybe he saw you carrying moving boxes and thought you were still settling in like a landlord prepping a rental property." Whatever the reason, we chalked it up as a one-time incident and moved on. But the next day proved us wrong in the most spectacular way. It was around dinner time. My wife had just set down a plate of pasta when the doorbell rang again. I rolled my eyes and muttered something about delivery drivers mixing up addresses, but when I opened the door, the world tilted just a little. The kid was back, and this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, lips pursed in a permanent scowl, was her, the soon-to-be bane of my existence, the woman whose very presence screamed chaos, the human embodiment of the name Karen. She didn't wait for me to speak. She didn't even acknowledge me with a nod or a basic greeting. She simply jabbed her finger in my direction and barked. "My son came here yesterday and told me you refused to discuss his future housing." I froze. "His housing, yes," she snapped. "He told you he wanted to live here and you dismissed him without even listening." "Oh, I listened. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that he had walked up to someone's private home and demanded to move in like it was a public resource." I kept my voice calm. "Ma'am, your son is mistaken if he believes this house is for rent. We never advertised anything." She waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. "That's irrelevant. My son will be starting college here soon and he needs a place to live. Dorms are disgusting, cramped, full of germs and noisy children. I will not allow my son to suffer like that." The kid stood behind her, nodding solemnly as though he were a prince, and I had dishonored him. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to stay polite, "but we're not renting out any rooms. This is our home. We just moved in." Karen leaned forward, slightly too close for comfort, and lowered her voice like someone delivering a threat disguised as advice. "Everything is negotiable." I blinked. "Not this. We're expecting a baby." "We need the whole house," she scoffed loudly. "Well, that's very inconsiderate of you. My son has needs too, you know. I couldn't help it, I laughed. I actually laughed in her face. Not to mock her, but because the absurdity was too much. It was the kind of laugh you give when your brain can't compute the level of entitlement being presented to you. Wrong move. Her face darkened instantly, lips tightening into a thin, trembling line. A room, she spat. Did you think we were asking for a room? You clearly don't understand. You will give him the entire house. For a moment, my brain couldn't process the words. The entire house. Yes, she shrieked. I wouldn't allow him to live with rude strangers like you. This house suits him. You need to move out, immediately. I felt a pulse of heat rush through me, anger mixed with disbelief. I stepped back, exhaled slowly, and before I said something I'd regret, I simply closed the door. Firmly. But Karen wasn't done. The pounding started immediately, fist after fist against my door, her voice shrill and echoing through the hallway. Open this door. We aren't done, you can't just ignore me, this is our right. My wife's fork clattered against her plate as she flinched. She clutched her stomach, startled. Her breathing quickened and I could see stress rising in her eyes. She was 6 months pregnant, she didn't need this kind of chaos. I guided her gently to our bedroom, helped her sit on the bed and handed her headphones. Stay here, I whispered. I'll deal with it. She nodded, though, fear lingered behind her eyes. I closed the bedroom door and took a steadying breath before marching back toward the front of the house. The pounding continued. The shouting grew louder. Neighbors were starting to open their windows and glance outside. And right as I reached for the doorknob, ready to tell Karen to leave my property, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. And Karen's voice suddenly shifted from rage to victory. She screamed triumphant, They're here, arrest the trespassers. My heart dropped. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The moment those sirens echoed down our street, a cold, sinking heaviness settled in my stomach. I stepped back from the door, not out of fear, but out of pure disbelief. I'd seen unreasonable people before. Everybody has. But I had never seen someone conjure a complete alternate reality, wrap it in tears and screaming, and then present it to the police as if it were gospel truth. Through the front window, I saw the cruiser pull up. 2 officers stepped out. One older, one younger, both wearing the same stiff, concerned expression officers wear when they think they're walking into a volatile domestic dispute. Karen, meanwhile, stood in my yard, dramatically waving her arms like she was trying to flag down a rescue helicopter in the middle of a shipwreck. There she shrieked, pointing at my front door as if she were identifying a fugitive. They're inside. They refused to leave my son's home. Her son stood behind her, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly unsure of what facial expression matched the scene his mother had created. He looked like a kid trying to figure out whether he was supposed to be outraged or scared. The officers approached Karen first. I cracked the door open just enough to hear the exchange. Ma'am, slow down, the older officer said. Can you explain what's happening? Karen placed her hands dramatically over her heart. This house, this home you're looking at, it belongs to my son. These people, she pointed at my door like I was a raccoon stealing food off her porch. These squatters broke in and refused to leave. I tried to reason with them, but they screamed at me and threatened us. I almost choked. Threatened I had barely said 10 words to her before I shut the door. The younger officer's brow furrowed. So you're saying the occupants inside are not the legal owners or tenants? Karen nodded, vigorously, tears forming, though not naturally. They were squeezed out through force like she was milking her tear ducts. That's correct. They won't leave. Please remove them. My son starts college soon. He needs his home. Her son nodded again, like a bobblehead forced into agreement. The officers exchanged a glance, one that signaled they had to take the complaint seriously, even if it sounded ridiculous. That's the thing about law enforcement. They can't assume people are lying, even when the lie smells like something scraped from the bottom of an old trash bin. And that was the moment they approached my door. I opened it fully, stepping out onto the porch, hands visible, posture calm. I didn't want anything escalating, not with my pregnant wife in the bedroom. Good evening, officers, I said. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. The older officer held up a hand to stop me. Sir, are you currently occupying this residence? My eyebrows rose so high I'm amazed they stayed attached to my face. Yes, I live here. My wife lives here. We bought this house. Karen gasped behind them as if I'd confessed to murder. That's a lie, she screamed. He broke in. He's trying to steal my son's home. The younger officer cleared his throat. Sir, do you have any form of identification and documentation that proves ownership? Yes, I said firmly. Give me 1 second. I stepped back inside and closed the door, locking it, while I retrieved our folder, the one containing the deed closing, documents, property tax receipts, everything. My hands were steady, surprisingly so. Maybe because beneath the shock and frustration was something stronger, a quiet kind of anger that only builds when someone tries to strip you of something sacred, your home, your safety, your dignity. When I reopened the door, Karen lunged forward like she expected to catch me fleeing the premises. I held up the folder. I have everything right here. The officer stepped closer. Karen craned her neck like she was trying to see the documents telepathically. "Sir," the younger officer said, "we'll need to review these." "Of course," I replied, handing them the entire stack. Karen crossed her arms triumphantly. "Those papers are fake. They printed them. Squatters do this all the time, you know." My cousin's friend's neighbor had the exact same thing happen. She said it with the confidence of someone quoting a Supreme Court ruling. The officers ignored her and began looking through the documents, the purchase contract, loan documents, deed transfer, property tax statements, everything filed legally and properly. Meanwhile, Karen kept pacing dramatically behind them, muttering things like "unbelievable" and "the audacity," and "I can't wait to see them dragged out." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the officers quietly as they flipped through the papers. My heart was steady now. I knew the facts were on my side. And facts, unlike Karen, don't scream. After a few minutes, the older officer looked up. "This appears to be legitimate," Karen gasped. "What do you mean appears? Check again." "They probably photoshopped something." Her son tugged her sleeve. "Mom, maybe." "Quiet," she hissed without even turning around. The officers didn't react to her outburst. Instead, the older one turned to her son. "Do you have documentation showing ownership, a deed, lease, anything?" The kid froze like a deer in headlights. His eyes darted, his mouth opened, closed, opened again. Well, my mom." Karen swooped in. "He doesn't need paperwork. We know the truth. They stole his home." The younger officer sighed and closed the folder. "Ma'am, unless you can provide legal proof that your son owns this property, we have to go by the documented evidence which clearly shows this man and his wife purchased and own the home." Karen's face twitched, like a glitching character in a video game moments before the final boss battle. "No," she whispered. "No. No. I refuse to accept this. They're criminals. Arrest them." The older officer straightened. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." "I will not," she screamed, her voice cracking like thunder. "Do your job." The officers exchanged another look. This one wasn't patient or procedural. It was weary, because now they weren't dealing with a property dispute. They were dealing with a disturbance, an unstable one. "Ma'am," the older officer said, firmly, "filing a false police report and misusing emergency services is a criminal offense. If you do not stop shouting and step back, we will have to take further action." Karen threw her arms in the air. "I am the victim. You should be protecting me. This is harassment. This is discrimination. That's enough," the younger officer snapped. Not yelling, but firm enough to cut through her tantrum. For a moment, she stood frozen mouth hanging open mid-scream. Her son whispered, "Mom, let's just go." "No," she snarled. "They haven't paid. They haven't suffered consequences." "Ma'am," the officer interrupted, "turn around. Hands behind your back." Gasps rippled from the gathering neighbors. Karen sputtered, You can't arrest me. I'll sue you. I'll sue everyone here." But the officers didn't respond. They guided her toward the cruiser as she kicked, twisted, and shrieked like a banshee auditioning for a horror film. Her son stood alone, shrinking into himself before quietly backing away and practically jogging home. When the cruiser finally drove off, silence fell over the street. A long, heavy silence filled with disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Inside, my wife peeked from the hallway, worry painted across her face. "Are we okay?" she asked softly. I took her hand and nodded. "For now," I said, "but something tells me this isn't the last we've heard of her." And unfortunately, I was right. I stood in the doorway long after the police cruiser disappeared at the end of the street. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet left behind after a storm tears through a town. Heavy, charged, too still. My wife stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. Her eyes searched mine, looking for reassurance I wasn't fully sure I could give. "It's over." "Right," she whispered. I forced a smile. "Yeah, they took her away. It should be done." But deep in my gut, something nagged me. People like Karen didn't just walk away from humiliation. They didn't retreat gracefully. They didn't let go. They regrouped. They plotted. They came back louder. And she had been publicly embarrassed. In front of neighbors, in front of her son, in front of the police. That kind of ego doesn't bruise. It breaks, then sharpens. Still, I didn't want my wife worrying. So I helped her finish dinner, held her close while we ate, and reassured her again and again that everything was fine. When she finally fell asleep, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening for anything unusual outside a car door, footsteps, another knock. But nothing happened. Not that night. The next morning I brewed coffee and stepped outside onto our porch. The air was cool, crisp, almost too normal, until I noticed the subtle hum of conversation nearby. Two of our neighbors, people I barely knew, were standing on the sidewalk glancing at my house. Normally I wouldn't have cared, but the looks they gave me weren't the sympathetic kind. They were curious, hesitant, almost like they weren't sure whether to say hello or avoid eye contact. Great, just what I needed, neighborhood gossip. As I sipped my coffee, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived across the street, shuffled out with her little terrier. She caught my eye and offered a polite but strained smile. "Quite the commotion last night," she said. "You could say that," I answered, trying to laugh it off. She lowered her voice. "I don't know that woman well, but be careful. People like her don't let things go." I gave her a thankful nod, though. I already knew that. Later that day, my wife and I ran errands. She wanted to pick out paint samples for the nursery, and for a couple of hours, things felt normal again. Watching her smile at little baby-themed decorations eased some of the tension that had knotted itself into my shoulders. When we returned home, though, that fragile calm shattered the moment I pulled into our driveway. There were tire tracks on our lawn, fresh ones, shallow enough to show they came from a smaller vehicle, probably a sedan, but deep enough that they weren't accidental. They were intentional. They cut across the grass in a wide arc, circling dangerously close to our front steps, before disappearing back onto the road. My wife gripped my arm. Who would do that? I didn't even have to say it out loud. We both knew. Karen. Even if she wasn't physically here, she had friends, supporters, loyal minions eager to help her get revenge on the evil homeowners who dared to own the house she wanted for her son. I took pictures of the tracks, just in case, then ushered my wife inside and tried to lighten the mood. Maybe it was teenagers messing around. Maybe someone made a bad turn. Maybe no. I couldn't lie to myself. The timing was too perfect. Over the next few days, more things began to happen. Small things, little harassments meant to needle under the skin. One morning our trash cans were knocked over, pushed, not blown. Trash scattered across the driveway. Another day, a delivery driver told me someone had tried to divert our packages to a different address earlier that morning using my name. Twice, I found little handwritten notes shoved into our mailbox. Nothing explicit, just vague threats. "People know what you did. This neighborhood belongs to families who follow the rules. You should consider moving before things get worse." All unsigned. All written in a messy script that looked suspiciously like someone trying to disguise their handwriting. My temper simmered, but my priority was my wife. Her stress levels were climbing, and the baby didn't need to experience this tension before even entering the world. So I tried to keep things peaceful. I told her I had everything under control. But one evening, as the sun was setting, we finally pushed past the point of calm solutions. I was in the garage organizing boxes when I heard a faint noise outside. Not a knock, not shouting, something softer, subtle, like the sound of leaves being pushed aside. I stepped over to the garage entrance and looked out toward the yard. A figure stood by our mailbox. A young woman, late teens or early 20s, hood up, hands in her pockets, glancing around nervously as she slid something into our box. When she noticed me, she froze like a deer caught in headlights. "Hey," I shouted, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" She jerked backward, stumbling before turning to sprint down the sidewalk. I ran after her, not to catch her, but to see where she was going. She darted into a black Prius, parked 2 houses down. The moment the door shut, the car sped off, but not before I saw the license plate. I jogged back toward the house, adrenaline pumping, anger spiking higher than before. My wife stepped outside, worry written across her face. "What happened?" she asked breathlessly. I opened the mailbox. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it slowly. This one wasn't vague. It wasn't threatening in a subtle way. It wasn't cryptic. It was blunt, brutal, almost cartoonishly venomous. "Give the house back. You stole it from a family who needs it more. If you don't leave, you'll regret it." No signature. But the handwriting. It was the same sloppy attempt at disguise as the previous notes. And the message. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was escalation. A promise that someone, maybe Karen, maybe one of her followers, wasn't done. I took a picture of the note, folded it, and put it with the others. Then I sat on the porch steps, trying to keep my breathing steady. My wife sat beside me, quiet for a long time before speaking. Do we call the police again? I considered it. But the thing about reporting harassment is simple. If you can't prove who did it, it becomes a file in a drawer, a record, a warning, nothing actionable. We document everything I finally said, every note, every incident, every detail. If this continues, we'll build a case. She nodded slowly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. That night I couldn't sleep again. I lay awake listening for every sound outside, every rustle of wind, every creak of settling wood. Every noise the house made suddenly felt amplified suspicious. At around 3 a.m., I got out of bed and checked the front porch, then the backyard, then the garage. Everything looked normal, too normal. The artificial normal that hangs right before something happens. And I had no idea just how right I was. Because the next morning, when we opened our front door, Karen was back. Not screaming, not demanding. Standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing a smug smile. A smile that said she had a new plan, a bigger one. One that made the previous chaos look like warm-up exercises. There she was, Karen, back on my sidewalk like she owned the neighborhood, wearing that same smug expression that could curdle milk. She didn't storm toward my door. She didn't scream. She didn't even flail her arms around like a malfunctioning windmill the way she usually did. She simply stood there, calm, too calm. And that was significantly more unsettling than any tantrum she had thrown before. My wife gripped my hand tightly. I felt her fingers tremble. I wanted to tell her to go inside, but I also knew her anxiety would only grow if she didn't know what was happening. So I squeezed her hand once, quiet reassurance, and stepped forward. Karen watched my approach like a hawk stalking prey. "Good morning," she said stiffly, as if we were having a polite conversation over coffee instead of whatever this was. I didn't return the greeting. "What are you doing here?" she smiled, thin artificial stretched too far at the corners. I wanted to speak civilly. After all, neighbors should resolve disputes calmly. My jaw tightened. There is no dispute. This is our house. You don't live here. Your son doesn't live here. End of story. She shook her head slowly, pityingly, as if I were the irrational one. "See, that's exactly your problem. You're approaching this from a selfish perspective." I blinked. Selfish. "Yes," she snapped, as if the word had been sitting on her tongue, waiting to be thrown like a dart. "Some people are meant to give back to their community. Some people are meant to support those in need. And let me guess," I said flatly, "we're the some people." Her grin widened. "Exactly." For a moment, I didn't speak. I simply stared at her, waiting for the next explosive wave of insanity. She didn't disappoint. "I talked to several board members," she said proudly. "They all agree your family would be much more comfortable in a rental, a small one, something more appropriate for your income status." I almost laughed, but the seriousness in her tone sucked the humor right out of the moment. "We don't have a board here," I said. "This neighborhood doesn't have an HOA. "Not officially," she said coyly, tapping her chin. "But several neighbors have been very open to the idea of forming one." Ah, so that was her new approach. If she couldn't get our house through intimidation or fake legal claims, then she'd start building a fake structure of authority to pressure us. I folded my arms. "Let me make one thing extremely clear. Even if there was an HOA, they still wouldn't have the power to seize private property." Karen let out a small laugh. "Oh, you sweet, naive man. You clearly don't understand how these things work. When a community decides you don't belong, that's enough," I snapped. She flinched, offended by the interruption. "No. You listen," I said, stepping closer. "My wife is pregnant. We worked for years to buy this home. We mind our business. We keep to ourselves. We bother no one. But you keep inserting yourself into our lives, and it's going to stop today." Her nostrils flared. "Or what?" Or I said calmly, "I file a harassment report, and I press charges." Karen laughed again, sharp, mocking the sound of a woman who believed she was untouchable. "Go ahead," she said. "The police already embarrassed themselves once. They won't dare do it again." I took a slow breath. "Leave. Now." She didn't move. She studied my face, searching for cracks, for fear, for hesitation. And when she didn't find any, her smile dropped. "Fine," she muttered. "But don't say I didn't try to be reasonable." She turned around and walked away, shoulders, stiff steps, clipped and angry. Her son was waiting for her down the sidewalk, leaning against the black Prius I'd seen the night before. When she reached him, she whispered something sharply and climbed into the passenger seat. The Prius sped off a second later. My wife let out a shaky breath. "Do you think she's done?" "No," I said honestly. "That wasn't a goodbye. That was a warning. The next week proved me right. It began with more notes shoved under our door, taped to our mailbox, tucked into the crack of our garage. Some were written in that same fake handwriting. Others clearly weren't disguising anything anymore. You're being watched. Get out while you still can. This neighborhood deserves better residents. One note said, the board has voted. You're being removed. There was no board. Not yet, anyway. I started keeping all the notes in a sealed folder and writing down dates, times, and details. I wanted everything documented. Then came the cameras. Not ours. Theirs. Small, cheap cameras positioned across the street. One inside a parked car. Another placed on a windowsill of a house I'd never even noticed before. None of them were subtle. They weren't meant to be. They were meant to intimidate. My wife cried the night she spotted the first one. I held her and promised I wouldn't let anything happen to our family no matter what. But anger was starting to replace fear inside me. Every new invasion, every new trick, every little childish act of harassment was fuel thrown onto a fire that was steadily growing inside my chest. 1 week later, on a Thursday afternoon, things escalated beyond annoyance. I had just returned from the grocery store. As I carried bags inside, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from our doorbell camera. The notification showed a feed I didn't expect: 3 people, 2 women and 1 man walking up to our door with clipboards and printed papers in hand. They knocked loudly and repeatedly. My wife opened the door hesitantly. The feed had no audio from where I was standing, but even from my screen I could tell they were aggressive, pointing at their papers, waving their arms, stepping closer to my wife than anyone should. I dropped the groceries on the counter and sprinted toward the door. When I opened it, the 3 figures turned to me. "You must be the husband," the woman in front said. She had a cold smile, professional, calculated, not at all like Karen's unhinged expressions. "Who are you?" I demanded. "We're the interim HOA formation committee," she said proudly. "We're here to inform you that the community is moving forward with establishing a homeowners association. And based on your recent behavior, a formal complaint has already been filed against you." I stared at her. "There is no HOA here." "Not yet," she corrected, "but under state law we're allowed to form one with majority interest from neighbors." "And you think," I said slowly, "that gives you power over my property?" The man behind her stepped forward. "We have reason to believe you're creating disruption in the neighborhood." I nearly laughed. "Because we exist. Because we refuse to hand over our home to a stranger." They exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the truth spoken aloud. "We'll be back," the lead woman said sharply, "with paperwork." They turned and walked away. My wife looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered. I pulled her close. "They won't win, I promise you." But inside, something dark and resolute settled in my chest. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. Because I wasn't just protecting a house, I was protecting my family. And nothing, not Karen, not her pretend board, not her fake authority, was going to push us out. Not without a fight they'd regret. The so-called interim HOA committee left our driveway with the confidence of people who thought they'd just issued a royal decree. My wife stood frozen in the doorway, holding her belly with one hand and gripping my sleeve with the other. I guided her inside, shut the door, and locked it. "Breathe," I whispered, placing my hands on her shoulders. "They can't do anything. They're pretending to be something they're not." She nodded shakily, but her eyes were wide with exhaustion and fear. "I just want our baby to be safe." That sentence hit me harder than anything Karen had thrown at us. All of this nonsense, every knock, every note, every camera, was wearing her down. She wasn't sleeping. She startled at every sound. She was living in a constant state of dread. And that wasn't okay. I spent the next hour calling around. Real estate attorney, police non-emergency line, even the city zoning office. The conclusion crystal clear. No one could just start an HOA and give it authority over existing private property without legal filings, an established developer unanimous agreement among owners, and a mountain of paperwork. In other words, what Karen and her merry band of clipboard crusaders were doing was nothing but theater, a performance, a bluff. Except a bluff can still do harm when it's delivered loudly enough. Later that evening, around 7:30 p.m., as I sat in the living room trying to distract my wife with a cheesy rom-com, our doorbell rang again, hard, repeatedly. Not the polite ding-dong kind, more like someone stabbing the button with rage. I checked the camera feed. Karen. Of course. This time she wasn't pretending to be calm. She was pacing on our porch like a deranged metronome, arms, flailing mouth moving so fast the camera couldn't keep up. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me so my wife couldn't hear the shouting. Karen spun toward me instantly. "You!" she screamed, jabbing a finger at my chest. You think you're clever, don't you? You think you can make me look like some kind of lunatic. You don't need my help with that, I said before I could stop myself. Her face contorted. The committee told me everything. You were rude, aggressive, threatening. They're filing a report, let me guess, I replied. A report to the HOA that doesn't exist. It does exist, she barked. And soon you're going to be fined, then removed, then replaced by people who actually respect the community. I exhaled slowly. Karen, please listen. There is no scenario, none where you or anyone else gets this house. It is ours. We worked for it. We will die in it if we have to. You need to stop. No, she spat. You need to understand that this house was meant for my son. He deserves a real home. A good home. You people, you just took it because you moved fast. Because you had money ready. That isn't fair, ah. There it was. Not entitlement, not confusion, not some misguided belief in HOA power. Jealousy. Ugly burning jealousy. You think this house is some prize you were robbed of, I said quietly. But life doesn't hand out homes because people deserve them. You're not the victim here. She shook her head violently. You stole it. No, I said firmly. We bought it. Legally. End of story. She stepped closer, lowering her voice into a venomous hiss. If you don't hand it over, you'll wish you had. I stood up straighter. Are you threatening me? She didn't answer. Just smirked, turned, and stomped down the porch steps. That should have been the end of it for the night. But of course, it wasn't. At 2:14 a.m., I woke up to a loud metallic noise. Not inside the house, outside. Near the driveway, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my wife, and quietly approached the living room window. Peering through the curtains, I scanned the street. At first, I saw nothing. Then movement flickered near the edge of our property. Two figures, both holding flashlights, both bent over something at the side of our house. My heart pounded as I leaned closer, trying to make sense of what they were doing. One of them raised a tool, a metal rod or something, and tapped it against our water meter housing. A chill ran through me. They weren't snooping. They were tampering. Not tonight, I muttered under my breath. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside through the side door as quietly as possible. I didn't turn on any lights or call out immediately. I wanted a moment to assess the situation. When I got close enough to see their faces illuminated by flashlight beams, I froze, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief. Karen's son, and another kid, probably a friend, both with cheap ski masks pulled to their chins instead of over their faces, clearly too inexperienced to know how masks work, kneeling beside our water meter. The friend whispered nervously, "Dude, hurry up. I don't think this is legal." Karen's son hissed back, "My mom said it's fine. This'll show them. If they don't have water, they'll have to leave." Water. They were trying to shut off our water supply. For a pregnant woman, I stepped into the beam of their flashlights. You two picked the wrong house. They screamed. Both fell backward like bowling pins. The friend scrambled to his feet, tripping over his own shoelaces, while Karen's son remained on the ground, blinking rapidly. He stammered. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "My mom said," he began. I cut him off. "Your mom puts you up to everything, doesn't she?" The friend bolted down the sidewalk. Karen's son made a pathetic attempt to run, but I grabbed him by the arm, not to hurt him, just to stop him long enough to snap a picture with my phone. "Hey, don't," he squealed. "Smile," I said coldly. "This is going on the police report." He ripped his arm free and took off after his friend, nearly slipping twice in his panic. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the water meter, my pulse pounding. They had actually tried to sabotage our utilities. A line had been crossed. Again. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived within 15 minutes. I showed him the picture, the damaged meter housing, and the string of harassment we'd received. He nodded gravely, took notes, and told me he'd file a formal report. Before leaving, he said something that sent a chill through me. "Families like yours shouldn't have to deal with this. But people like her, they don't stop until someone stops them." And he was right. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a threat. The next morning, I told my wife everything briefly, careful not to scare her, but even the watered-down version upset her. She spent most of the day lying down, trying to calm the stomach cramps brought on by stress. Seeing her like that broke something inside me. This wasn't about dealing with a crazy neighbor anymore. This was about protecting my wife, my unborn child, and our right to live in peace. And the universe, in a sick twist of timing, decided that was the perfect moment to knock again. Except this time it wasn't Karen, it was the police. Again, 2 officers stood at our door, stern-faced. And behind them, Karen, smiling triumphantly. See, she told the officers. I told you he threatened my son, arrest him. I stared at her, stunned. She was escalating again. And this time, it was about to get even uglier. I didn't answer right away. I simply stood there, staring at the scene on my front porch, the two officers, stiff and serious, and behind them, Karen wearing the most disturbingly satisfied smile I had ever seen plastered on a human face. Her arms were crossed, chin lifted triumphantly, eyes sparkling with the poisonous delight of someone who truly believed she was about to win. Sir, the older officer began, we received a report that you threatened physical harm against this woman's son last night. Karen let out a dramatic gasp as if she were hearing this for the first time. Yes, officer, my poor boy came home shaking. You assaulted him, you grabbed him and threatened to destroy our family if we didn't leave your precious house alone. I didn't move, not an inch. Because anger, when it burns hot enough, doesn't explode. It freezes. It becomes a cold, razor-sharp focus that slices through chaos with clarity. I finally spoke. Officers, her son attempted to tamper with our water meter last night. I caught him doing it. I have photo evidence. I called the police myself. There's already a report filed. Karen's fake shock dissolved instantly. Her smile faltered. Just for a split second. But she recovered quickly, stepping forward and shoving herself between me and the officers. That's a lie, she screeched. My son was with me all night. He never touched anything. You're framing him. You're trying to justify your violence. I looked at the officers. Would you like to see the photo? The younger officer nodded. Yes, please. I stepped inside, retrieved my phone, and returned to the porch. I pulled up the picture, the one I took when I grabbed the kid's arm. Karen's son's face was crystal clear, lit up perfectly by the flashlight he dropped. His eyes wide, his mouth open mid-squeal. I held the screen forward. The officers leaned in. Karen lunged between us, snatching the phone from my hand before they could even study the image. She pressed her finger hard against the screen, distorting the photo. Then she whipped her arm back and hurled my phone toward the lawn. I caught it mid-air. Wow, I said softly. That's obstruction of evidence. Good to know. The younger officer straightened. Ma'am, you can't do that. Karen spun toward him, outraged. Why are you taking his side again? She shrieked. Can't you see he's manipulating everything? He's dangerous. The older officer exhaled the long, exhausted sigh of a man who had reached his limit. Ma'am, we need to speak to your son. If he's making accusations, we need his statement directly. Karen froze. He's not home, she said a little too quickly. Where is he? The officer pressed. She looked around wildly, mentally scrambling for a lie. He went to the store. At 7:45 inches the morning, the officer asked, unimpressed. Yes, she snapped. Alone, he added. Yes, he's a responsible adult. The younger officer stepped to the side and radioed in quietly. Karen glanced around, breathing faster now, voice rising. You can't interrogate him. He's traumatized. You can't, ma'am, the older officer interrupted firmly. We need to confirm both sides of the story. If you filed a false police report, Karen's face twisted. I didn't, he did it. He's lying, he's. She jabbed her finger toward me again, voice cracking with hysteria. He attacked my family. I stood calm and still. Officers checked the damage to the water meter. It's still there. The younger officer stepped off the porch with purposeful strides. Karen ran after him. No, don't. You don't have permission to look. That's his property. No, wait. That's OUR property. My son's property. You can't, don't touch anything. The older officer followed the younger one while I waited inside the doorway. Karen stayed glued to them, circling like a frantic moth around a flame, trying to block their view, talking nonstop, in panicked, chaotic bursts. But the moment the officers crouched down and saw the scratched bolts, the pried metal, the tampered housing, everything became perfectly clear. The younger officer stood up. We're going to need your son to come answer some questions. Karen backed away, trembling all over. No, he won't. He doesn't have to. You're harassing us. You're harassing us. The older officer spoke calmly. Ma'am, you need to step aside. Right now. She didn't. She planted her feet in the grass and shook her head violently, hair flying around her face. No, I won't let you. I won't let you take him. I won't let you destroy our livelihood. We deserve that house. They stole it. The officer straightened. Ma'am, turn around. The words dropped like heavy stones. Karen froze. No, she whispered. Turn around, he repeated. She didn't move. So he stepped forward, took her wrist, and began the process. No, 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 she screamed. You can't do this. I'm the victim. I'm the victim. But the handcuffs clicked into place. When the officers guided her toward the cruiser, she kicked the air, twisted her arms, and screamed like someone being kidnapped by aliens. You can't arrest me twice. I'll sue. I'll own this whole department. My son will have this house. You hear me? You can't stop us. Neighbors peeked from their windows, curtains shifted, doors cracked open. Someone even stepped onto their porch to record the whole meltdown. Karen noticed and shrieked even louder. Stop recording. I'll sue you. You can't, this is illegal. I'm being targeted. Her voice faded as they placed her into the back of the cruiser. Then the door shut. Silence washed over the neighborhood. The older officer approached me once more. We'll follow up with you later today, sir, but rest assured this behavior won't be tolerated. I nodded slowly. Thank you, really. The officers drove off, leaving behind nothing but a few muddy footprints and a lingering mixture of shock and relief. I walked back inside. My wife sat on the couch, hands pressed to her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Is she gone? She whispered. Yes, I said, sitting beside her. For now. And this time, she crossed enough lines that I don't think it's going to end with just another warning. She leaned against me, sobbing quietly. I held her as tightly as I could. But even as the house settled into stillness, even as the air calmed, even as the day stretched forward with a fragile feeling of safety, I knew. This wasn't over. Karen wasn't finished. People like her didn't stop after getting arrested. People like her thought consequences were unfair punishments for being right. People like her always came back. And I had a gut feeling, one I couldn't shake, that the next round was going to be even worse. Because humiliation makes unstable people unpredictable, and Karen had just been humiliated twice. For the rest of that morning, the house felt wrapped in a strange, fragile bubble of quiet. Not peace. Peace had long abandoned our address, but a hollow pause like the brief stillness between aftershocks. My wife sat curled on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, sipping tea with trembling hands. I stayed close, watching the windows, checking the street every few minutes, as if Karen might materialize out of thin air. Around lunchtime, I finally convinced her to lie down. She needed rest. The stress was eating her alive, and the baby didn't deserve the madness swirling around us. Once she was asleep, I spent the next hour gathering all our documentation, the notes, the photos, everything, and organizing them into a binder. It felt like building armor. But the quiet didn't last long. Around mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I normally would have ignored it, but something told me to answer. Hello, a hesitant voice responded. Is this the homeowner? The one with the, incident this morning? Yes, I said cautiously. I'm Officer Daniels. I wasn't one of the responding officers, but I've been assigned to review the case. I exhaled. Thank you, officer. I appreciate any help. Well, he said slowly, that's what I'm calling about. The woman in custody, Karen, she's demanding to file multiple formal statements. Claims of discrimination, assault, harassment, conspiracy. Frankly, some of it is incoherent. Incoherent sounds about right, I muttered. She's also demanding to speak with a judge immediately, he continued. We're sorting through what's legitimate for processing and what isn't, but I wanted to give you a heads up. There's a chance she'll be released sometime tonight. Not because we're letting her off, but because the charges right now are misdemeanors. It's procedure. My stomach tightened, so she could come back. It's possible, he admitted. We've placed a temporary no-contact order in the system, but enforcement only works if it's violated. I'd strongly recommend keeping your security cameras active, documenting everything, and calling us immediately if anything happens. I thanked him again and hung up. A no-contact order was better than nothing, but only barely. People like Karen didn't see legal boundaries as rules. They saw them as challenges, obstacles, things to step over. I didn't want to wake my wife with the news, so I kept it to myself and continued preparing. I went outside, tightened the screws on the porch camera, adjusted the angle of the garage cam, installed a new motion sensor light, and checked the door locks again and again until my rational brain told me I was overdoing it. But my instincts told me I wasn't doing enough. Night came too quickly. We ate a quiet dinner. My wife did her best to act normal, but her hands trembled when she held her fork. I tried to reassure her, told her things would calm down, that the law would handle Karen, that she wasn't alone. But the weight pressing down on us felt impossible to lift. Around 10 p.m., just as we were heading to bed, the doorbell rang. My heart lurched. I checked the camera feed instantly. It wasn't Karen. It was her son, alone, standing on our porch in the dark, shifting nervously from foot to foot. My first instinct was anger. Anger for what he'd done, for how he'd let his mother drag him into her chaos. Anger for the stress he'd contributed to. But when I zoomed in on his face, I saw something else. Fear. Genuine fear. Not the bratty kind he'd shown before. The kind that comes from realizing you're in way over your head. I stepped outside but kept the door cracked behind me. What do you want? He swallowed hard. I came to apologize. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust whatever game Karen might be playing. He glanced at the camera. I know you're recording. That's fine. I need to say something. I crossed my arms. Go on. He wiped his palms on his jeans. My mom, she's not well. She hasn't been for a long time. I've tried to tell her to stop. I tried to stop her from coming here, but she doesn't listen. She doesn't listen to anyone. Your mom tried to get you to shut off water to a pregnant woman, I said sharply. You went along with it. His eyes fell. I know, and I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't know it would get this far. I just thought, maybe if she saw I tried, she'd calm down. She doesn't calm down unless she gets what she wants. Well, I said what she wants is illegal. He nodded. I know. And now she's in jail, and she's blaming everyone but herself. Is she out? I asked. He shook his head. Not yet, but she will be soon. And she said she's coming straight here. My blood ran cold. He continued, voice cracking now. I don't agree with her. I don't want your house. I don't want anything. I just want her to stop. But she won't stop unless someone forces her to. You could press charges, I said. He laughed bitterly. Against my own mom. She'd destroy me. She might be crazy, but she's still my mom. And I still live with her. A strange mix of anger and pity twisted in my gut. The kid was trapped in her storm. He took a shaky breath. She said she has one last plan. Something big. Something she said would end it once and for all. I don't know what that means, but it scared me. What kind of plan? I demanded. I don't know, he insisted. She wouldn't tell me. She just told me to look the other way. My shoulders tensed. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. A threat from someone rational is frightening. A threat from someone unhinged is unpredictable. But a threat from someone who has already crossed lines repeatedly, who's been humiliated twice, who feels justified in their crusade. That is dangerous. Why tell me this? I asked. Because he swallowed hard. You have a baby coming, and you don't deserve what she's planning. His voice cracked a second time. Just be ready. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't stop him. I didn't call after him. I just stood there, staring down the dark street as he disappeared into the shadows. When I went back inside, my wife was standing in the foyer, hands shaking. What was that? I couldn't sugarcoat it. A warning. Her eyes widened in terror. She's coming back, I said quietly, but this time with something worse. My wife pressed a hand to her belly. What do we do? I exhaled slowly. We prepare, and we did. I moved furniture away from windows, turned on every security light, locked every deadbolt, set up a chair near the front door so I could hear everything outside. But the truth was, no amount of preparation felt like enough, because I didn't know what we were preparing for. Fire vandalism, another false police report, a break-in attempt, or something I hadn't even imagined yet. At 2:03 a.m., I got my answer. The sound that woke me wasn't a knock, it wasn't shouting, it wasn't a car, it was a loud crash, the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My wife screamed. And somewhere outside a woman's voice screeched, "Now you'll learn." Karen had returned. And this time she didn't come alone. The sound of shattering glass is one of those noises that your brain registers before you're even fully awake. Primitive, unmistakable, the kind of alarm that bypasses logic and hits straight into survival mode. My wife bolted upright, clutching her stomach, her face pale with terror. I told her to stay in the bedroom and not to move. She didn't argue. She couldn't. Her voice was trapped somewhere between fear and shock. I rushed into the hallway, heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. I didn't grab anything, not even my phone. I just sprinted toward the living room where a cold gust of air swept in through a gaping hole where our front window had been just minutes earlier. Glass shards sparkled across the floor like a field of lethal diamonds. The curtains whipped around violently in the night wind. And standing outside, silhouetted by the glow of the porch light, was Karen. Her hair was wild. Her shirt was ripped at the shoulder. There was something in her hand, something heavy metal and frighteningly familiar. A crowbar. Behind her were two shadowy figures. I couldn't see their faces, but I didn't need to. They moved like teenagers, jittery, erratic, panicked. Probably the same kids she'd roped into helping her before. Maybe even the same friend who ran when I caught them at the water meter. But tonight they weren't sneaking or hiding. Tonight Karen had gone full feral. She stared at me through the shattered window frame like a predator finally cornering prey. You should have listened, she hissed. You should have given us the house when you had the chance. My pulse surged with pure adrenaline and rage. What the hell is wrong with you? My wife is pregnant. I don't care, she shrieked back. You stole our home. You deserve what's coming. She raised the crowbar again, and for a brief nauseating moment, I thought she was going to climb straight through the broken window. I shouted over my shoulder, "Call the police." Even though I knew my wife was in the bedroom, terrified and shaking. Karen's eyes widened with fury. Don't you dare bring them into this again. They never listened to Emmy, they only listened to you. One of the teenagers tugged her arm. Mrs. K, we should go, this is crazy. She whipped around, slapping his hand away. No one tells me what to do, not you, not him, not anyone. Tonight we take back what was stolen. I stepped backward toward the hallway, trying to block her view of where my wife was. Get off my property, Karen. This is your final warning. She laughed, a horrible broken sound. Warnings are for weak people. And you, she pointed the crowbar at me, you're the weakest man I've ever met. That was when she did something I didn't expect. She turned and swung the crowbar, not at me, but at our car. The windshield exploded, instantly raining glass across the driveway. She swung again, and again. Each hit fueled by months, maybe years of pent-up resentment, delusion, and entitlement. The teenagers backed away horrified, watching her spiral completely out of control. My wife screamed from the bedroom at the sound of the smashing. That scream broke something in me. I stormed toward the broken window. Karen, stop. She spun back toward the house crowbar at her side chest heaving. You can't stop me, she said, voice trembling. You can't stop any of this. Not until the house is back where it belongs. This house does not belong to you, I shouted. You don't own it. Your son doesn't own it. No one stole anything from you, her face twisted. You're wrong, she whispered. You're so wrong. She walked toward the window, stepping over broken glass with slow, deliberate movements. The teenagers pulled farther away, clearly terrified. This neighborhood, she said softly, was built for families like mine, not yours. Everyone knows it. Everyone agrees. You don't belong. You never did. I stared at her in disbelief. You've lost your mind. She smiled. Then I guess we're finally on equal footing. Before I could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Karen froze. The teenagers bolted immediately, sprinting down the street as fast as their legs could carry them. Karen spun toward the sound, eyes wide with panic. No, not again. You tricked me. You tricked me. I didn't call anyone, I said. You did this yourself. She raised the crowbar, pointing it straight at me like a weapon. If they take me again, she growled, I swear I'll make you pay for this. You haven't seen anything yet. The sirens grew louder, closer. Karen looked around wildly before taking off down the driveway. She stumbled, nearly fell, then regained her footing and sprinted toward the sidewalk. She didn't get far. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt at the corner. Flashing lights illuminated the street like a chaotic crime scene because that was exactly what it had become. Karen froze like a trapped animal, breathing hard, crowbar dangling from her hand. Officers poured out of the vehicles, shouting commands. Drop the weapon. Step away from the house, hands where we can see them. She didn't move. Then she lifted the crowbar. And that was enough. 3 officers tackled her before she could take a single step. She screamed, high-pitched, furious, unhinged, as they wrestled the crowbar from her grip and pinned her to the pavement. You can't do this. You can't arrest me. I'm the victim. He stole our house. He destroyed my life. Her voice cracked into messy sobs as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. But this time the officers didn't hesitate. They didn't offer warnings. They didn't give gentle corrections or patient explanations. They read her rights. Every last word. I stood in the broken window frame, breathing hard, watching as Karen's tirade dissolved into incoherent howling. My wife appeared behind me, clinging to my arm, shaking like a leaf. She rested her forehead against my shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. Is it over? She whispered. Yes, I said softly. This time, it's really over. I wasn't lying. Not this time. Karen wasn't arrested for a simple disturbance or false report. She was arrested for vandalism, destruction of property, trespassing, attempted break, in violation of a no-contact order, recklessly endangering a pregnant woman, and when they searched her car later that night, they found alteration, something that chilled me to the bone. A bag in the back seat containing zip ties, duct tape, spray paint, a hammer, and a handwritten note titled, How to Force Eviction. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't trying to scare us. She had a plan. A real plan. Had the police arrived even 5 minutes later, I don't know how far she would have gone. By dawn, the officers finished taking our statements. A police cruiser stayed parked outside until sunrise. My wife slept restlessly in our bedroom, and I stayed awake in the living room, staring at the broken window, replaying everything again and again in my head. Karen was gone now, arrested on serious charges, facing real consequences. But even in the exhaustion, relief, and shock, something nagged at me. Karen was only one part of this. She had tried to recruit neighbors, tried to start an HOA, tried to rile people against us, and someone else somewhere out there had helped her, left notes, placed cameras, redirected packages. Someone else shared her poisoned version of reality. A thought slipped into my mind, a dangerous one. What if Karen wasn't the only threat? But before I could dwell on it, my wife walked into the room wrapped in a blanket and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We're safe," she whispered. "For now," I replied. But the story wasn't done. Not yet, because the next morning we received a letter. Not from the police, not from Karen, but from a lawyer. And its contents blew this nightmare wide open. The envelope was thick, too thick to be junk mail, too stiff to be a bill, too formal to be anything harmless. "Law Offices of Weatherby and Crane" was printed across the top in embossed lettering, the kind of fancy legal stationery used by lawyers who bill by the minute and never smile. My wife hovered behind me as I slid it open. My hands were steady, but my pulse hammered in my ears. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what to expect anymore. Another false accusation, a fabricated complaint, some insane attempt at retaliation from Karen's remaining supporters. But what I actually found made my stomach drop. Inside was a cease and desist letter, addressed to me, accusing me of harassment, accusing me of targeted intimidation, accusing me of engaging in a pattern of aggressive, escalating behavior toward a vulnerable mother and her dependent, accusing me the victim of months of stalking, intimidation, vandalism, and attempted break-ins of creating a hostile neighborhood environment. At the bottom, in perfect cursive script, was a signature: Jared H. Crane, Esquire, attorney for Miss Karen Dalton. My wife gasped. She hired a lawyer. After everything she did, I clenched the letter so tightly that the paper wrinkled between my fingers. "Not just hired one," I muttered. "Paid for one. This isn't pro bono. This is someone who thinks she can rewrite history and weaponize the legal system." I read through the rest of the document, jaw tightening with every line. The letter demanded that I refrain from speaking about Karen publicly, avoid discussing her with neighbors, remove any and all defamatory recordings or security footage, cease public displays of aggression, and admit in writing that I had misunderstood the entire situation. Misunderstood? I whispered disbelief, turning into boiling anger. "She broke our window, tried to break into our house. She attacked my car. She tried to shut off our water while you're pregnant." My wife's voice trembled. This has to be illegal." "Right, it's not illegal," I said, exhaling slowly, "but it's a tactic, a bluff. Lawyers like this send hundreds of letters hoping someone folds. Tried and true method of the litigious and delusional." And Karen, sitting in a jail cell overnight, must have been absolutely foaming with determination to keep fighting. Except something was off. Why would she be able to hire a lawyer this fast, my wife asked. "She was arrested in the middle of the night." "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe a friend bailed her out. Maybe the committee she tried forming helped her. Or maybe—" I trailed off. My wife placed her hand on my arm, what I swallowed hard. Maybe someone else in the neighborhood is helping her. Someone with resources. The thought tasted bitter. Someone backing her, supporting her, feeding her obsession, and that was far more dangerous than Karen alone. I spent the next hour calling an actual attorney, one recommended by the officer who'd handled the earlier report. Thankfully, he agreed to meet with us the same day, given the severity of the situation. When we arrived at his office, the first thing he did after reading the cease and desist letter was chuckle. Not laugh, just a short dismissive. Exhale the sound a mechanic makes when someone brings in a car and claims the engine runs on moonlight. "This," he said, tapping the letter, "is noise. Empty, baseless noise. You don't respond. You don't acknowledge it. You don't sign anything. You don't engage." My wife let out a shaky sigh of relief. "So we don't have to do anything." "Oh, you have to do something," the attorney corrected. "You start documenting even more thoroughly than before. You prepare for escalation. People like this don't back down, just because they're wrong. They push harder." He paused, studying me. "But I'll say this, you've handled yourself well so far. You didn't lash out. You didn't retaliate. You didn't escalate. That will matter." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't unravel. If anything, it grew. When we got home, we found something else waiting for us. A crowd. 8 or 9 neighbors standing on the sidewalk across from our house, whispering, pointing, staring. My jaw tightened. My wife squeezed my hand. We approached slowly. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman across the street, stepped forward. "Are you two okay?" she asked, voice trembling. "We saw the police. We heard the breaking glass. We didn't know what to do." Another neighbor, a middle-aged man I'd only seen mowing his lawn before, added, "We didn't realize how bad it was. We thought she was just eccentric." "She's dangerous," my wife whispered. "She's obsessed with us." A younger woman, someone who had recently moved in, if I remembered correctly, spoke up, and she was dragging other neighbors into it. She tried to get us to sign petitions, said you were criminals, said you were taking advantage of the community. I raised an eyebrow. "And you believed her?" She shook her head quickly. "No, but some people did." My stomach sank. Who? The group exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, the middle-aged man spoke up. "The committee she kept talking about. They actually formed a group chat. They think Karen was wronged. They think she deserves compensation." "Compensation," I repeated slowly, as if the word were foreign. My wife whispered, "This can't be real." Another neighbor stepped closer. "We wanted you to know they're planning a meeting tomorrow night at the community green. They said it's about addressing the neighborhood intruder problem." Intruder. They meant me. A hot pulse surged through my chest, but before I could speak, Mrs. Henderson touched my arm gently. "Not all of us agree with them," she said. "Some of us support you, and we'll be there tomorrow. To make sure you're not alone." Her hand squeezed mine lightly, and then she did something that surprised me. She hugged my wife. A full, warm, motherly hug. My wife burst into tears instantly. The other neighbors stepped closer, some offering apologies, others offering support, a few offering contact information or security camera footage. It wasn't the whole neighborhood, but it was enough to remind us we weren't completely isolated. That night felt different. Not safe, not comfortable, but less lonely. Still, I couldn't shake the dread coiling in my gut about that upcoming meeting. Because if Karen truly had supporters, what did that mean for us? What were they planning? The following evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, we walked toward the community green. Not because we wanted to, but because we needed to know what was happening. My wife stayed close to me, her hand in mine, the other resting protectively over her belly. At least 10 people were already gathered. Some stood stiffly with crossed arms, others huddled in whispering pairs. Karen herself wasn't there. Thank God she was still detained, pending further charges, but the tension in the air was thick, hostile, and unmistakable. At the front of the group was a tall man in a suit jacket holding a clipboard. The same man from the interim HOA committee visit. He cleared his throat when he saw me. "Ah, the homeowner," he said, nodding once. "Good. We were just discussing you." "Glad I'm the topic of conversation," I said dryly. He ignored the sarcasm. "We've had several concerns voiced by neighbors about your behavior." "Which neighbors?" I asked. He gestured vaguely at the group. "Some." I looked around. 3 people avoided eye contact. 2 glared openly. The rest looked unsure. Then the man continued. "Given recent disturbances, including several police incidents, we have decided that until the confusion is resolved, it would be best if you and your wife temporarily vacated your home." My wife gasped. I stared. Dead silent. Then I laughed. A short, sharp, incredulous laugh. "Let me get this straight," I said. "A woman illegally harasses us, stalks us, damages our property, attempts to break in and gets arrested with a crowbar in hand, and you want us the victims to leave our home. It's for the safety of the community," he said smoothly. "No," I replied. "It's for your ego, and your fear of admitting you backed a lunatic," the crowd murmured. The man stiffened. "If you refuse, we will proceed with legal measures." I stepped forward. "There is no HOA. There is no committee. You have no authority. And if you try to force me out, I will sue every last one of you individually and collectively." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Henderson stepped beside me. "He's right," she said firmly. "This isn't fair, and you know it." Another neighbor joined her, then another, then another. One by one, people stepped forward. Not everyone, but enough. The man's grip on his clipboard faltered, and just as the group was on the brink of splintering completely, a police cruiser turned onto the street and parked at the edge of the green. Officer Daniels stepped out. "Good evening," he called. "We're here with an update on the Dalton case." Everyone turned toward him, and what he said next changed everything. "Karen Dalton has been denied bail. She will remain in custody pending psychiatric evaluation and criminal prosecution." Gasps erupted across the group, but then he added, "Her attorney has withdrawn from representation. Turns out she couldn't pay him." Relief crashed over me. But there was one more twist. Officer Daniels looked directly at the man with the clipboard, and we also uncovered communications from several residents encouraging her actions. The man paled. The officer continued, "We will be requesting statements from everyone involved. Harassment, conspiracy, and attempted forced eviction are serious offenses." The crowd scattered instantly, guilty ones dissolving into the night like shadow creatures caught in the light. My wife clutched my arm. "It's over," she whispered. And this time, it was true. Looking back, it's astonishing how quickly a dream home can turn into a battlefield, and how hard you must fight to reclaim peace once someone decides to invade it. My wife and I didn't just protect a house, we protected our family, our sanity, and our right to live without fear. Karen's downfall wasn't something I celebrated, but it was something I learned from. The truth is simple. Not everyone respects boundaries, but you must defend your own. Because if you don't, someone else will claim they own your life, your space, and your future. Hold your ground, document everything, stand up for what's yours. And don't be afraid to demand justice when others try to twist the truth. If you've ever dealt with a Karen, an HOA nightmare, or a neighbor who crossed the line, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. More unbelievable HOA stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one.